At this point, I'd like to invite the speakers to come forward, and we're going to have them sit up here at the dais. Okay, the question is, when we talk ecotourism, is it a public-private partnership? Could be, not necessarily. We don't know. You know, you put the word out and you invite people in, and then that becomes a part of negotiation. But it's not, when I'm talking about it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a public-private partnership. It's just an opportunity that we need to attract people here for.
My question to Don about housing. What is the cost of living?
Well, we've been working with our partners on the development of the cement mix and the process, and we've tried to be pretty conservative on the cost. Once the foundation is done, we believe, first of all, we print the altar at the same time, putting on the structure anywhere from 6.5 to 15 hours to do that, put a roof on it. We think within 30 days we have the house completed and sell below 150 complete, or lower than that. Now there are homes out there that will go for $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. There's not much to it, but there's certainly our capabilities. Also, we're looking at, from a green point of view, looking at other things besides just concrete, and looking at things like concrete and some recycled materials. But here in the state of Florida, and especially in certain states of the county, we have to use concrete. That's what we're looking at. Okay.
Let me come back to you.
Going with her question, if you would just construct the walls of the house, right, like roughly 1,200 square feet, what would be a wild guess on the price to do just that?
Just that.
Yep.
No windows?
Oh, you'd have windows in it.
$6,000, $5,000, maybe $6,000.
Okay, now we'll talk to you later.
It's Joe Justice, Man About Town, Charter Review Board in the county, correct? And also, the reason he's asking that question, he's a huge supporter and worker at the Habitat for Humanity. It's a great work in the community. Yes, I
have a granddaughter who has cancer, and she's 3. Would your medical of the future in any way help a child that has cancer that could remove it the same way you remove?
I certainly believe that's coming. You know, when you're looking at some of these children's hospitals, their advancements are amazing. So the advancements and their dedication to making sure that happens, I think it's going to happen. They're going to look at I think ultimately you may have a genetic map when you're born that someone takes a look at and see if you have a weakness in your genetic map, and ultimately see if we can correct that before you take your first steps. That'd be fascinating.
Thank you.
And if I can just add to that for a moment, Tim, check me if I'm wrong, but robotic surgery takes away any wiggle room.
Oh.
Any surgeon is going to be able to slip here or slip there. You can't slip with these things.
Yeah.
If he slips, the knife or whatever doesn't move. So I think operations like that, which is at the base of your spine, are going to be more practical using robotics than traditional surgery. So.
Well, I think Don quoted, what did you say it was? A fraction of the something?
0.5
0.5 millimeters of accuracy on the computers that's building all these models, these 3D models. And you think about the robot of the future for surgical care, their precision, versus a hand. Our surgeons are great, but the precision of a robot is pretty spectacular.
Tom?
Don, on the 1,200 square, you said it'd be about $6K, which is $500
Yeah,
a
first
square.
build just the walls. I mean, that's the cost of the walls. So,
Yeah.
so
You're talking like a standard 2,500 square foot CBS home?
well, one of the things we have to try and do is it's not an apples and oranges comparison. So we're the thing we're trying to get away from is giving you square foot cost, because it's a different process. The robot we have, so the first test we're going to do is sometime in November, and the first structure we built inside a building in the Midwest, primarily because we're trying to keep that as secret as possible. But the ability for the robot to create a structure up to 2,000 square feet by as one robot as possible. It's the cost of the material is one cost. The robot amortizes another cost. The fact that we have one operator minimizes the amount of labor we've got involved. So what we're looking at is on an 8-inch wall, an 8-inch wall printed, 8-inch wall width, and the test came back that our walls are 5 times stronger than a concrete block wall. We have the rebar right there. We think we can do 1,500 square feet at that price range we're looking at. We know we can go less than that. Until we do the testing and actually come up with the actual capabilities. Also, we're looking at the houses being built out differently. The wall will have a stucco finish, so it can be stucco inside, stucco outside. We can print the wall cavities to run the wiring and put them on the outside of the wall. We can put the insulation in there. We can tint the concrete to make sure that the walls are the same color. So we're playing. That's the reason I'm hemming and hawing, because we don't have all the correct answers right now. But we're conservatively thinking we could be a lot less expensive than the current construction processes. The important thing is that, and it ties into what Tim mentioned, skilled labor is hard to find down here, and that's because we're having a hard time finding a place to afford to rent or to live. And so nurses are in that same category. So we're looking to build something that's less expensive for them. So we're looking at trying to get something that's at 1,000 to 1,500 square feet for 150 or less, complete, appliances, all that noise.
I realize that you're on the ground level like the original robotic medicine, and your cost is going to be high right now, but the projected future,
It's going to, actually, one of the things that, and Tim mentioned this too, we already have, working with companies, already have robots. Have you guys seen the Boston Robotics? Have you seen Boston Robotics? Oh yeah, that company's bought by a Japanese firm. And watch the robot walk, and then do backflips, and then hold on. Okay, so the degree of accuracy. So the company we're working with can do robots. We can actually have robots to build the entire house. We want to run the wiring, put the plumbing in, and that's there. The software to do that. The ability in the AI side, the artificial intelligence side, which is what Tim's working with also, is just amazing. So we think we can very effectively build that structure very cost effectively. One other thing we can do with the robot that they don't do with construction, we build rounded walls. And the rounded walls have much better wind blowing. And for we've got a lot of builders come to us. They build homes on the coast that are $4, $5, $6 million homes. Those homes do not have rounded walls because they can't chip the block to make it round. So we can just put a robot in and build a rounded wall if we want to, just do that section. So we're trying to come up with a mechanism. And the robots right now are not inexpensive. We're looking at $500,000 for the system. We think that will come down exponentially over time, but we certainly believe that we can do something less than 150. That's what our goal is, and I think that's pretty good. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, yes, sir.
My wife and I are particularly interested in the Warm Mineral Springs. One question is if it were to be developed as a destination, what kind of an impact would it have on the surrounding areas as far as traffic, power supply systems? I mean, even a small echo destination is going to place tremendous demands, electrical power, everything else. What is it going to do to the surrounding areas as far as traffic flow, archaeology? Would it involve modifying or upgrading the current structures or crunching them down? And the springs are the heart of the thing, but what about the surrounding area that's existing today? Would that
That's a great
go
question.
away, get crunched?
Well, it's a great question, and when we dive into some of these types of projects, currently I would say all the existing facility would have to be removed because it currently doesn't even meet code, quite honestly. So it's a property that is deficient in its own own right, because first of all, it doesn't meet code, so I would perceive that all of that would be removed. In regards to infrastructure, that all needs to be studied as far as what the capacities currently are. We always employ traffic engineers when it comes into traffic to see what you have A, B, C, D levels of roadway systems that have been built into Northport many years ago, that, you know, the trip counts, and without getting into the detail, but all of that would have to be studied to see what type of intensity or lack thereof would be programmed for that site.
Just north
Jim?
of Norman, I believe it's north, is an archaeology site.
Yeah, you would never even touch, you
Would
wouldn't
never
even
touch
go
it.
there, that would be
Would
something
it
that would
put
be preserved.
extra
I mean, that's one of the,
traffic, extra
that's
stuff
one of
like
the
that?
huge proponents of ecotourism in development in that type of very sensitive environment. You would never even get into that type of exploration, and you would make sure that all of that is protected. It's not just the springs itself, it's all of the site that's around it.
Yeah, well, it's just that
Yeah.
particularly, a little bit familiar with the archaeology, and to know that it is a site, and I know it's not owned, it's owned by the University of Miami, I think.
That's Little Salt.
That's Little Salt
That's a different
Springs.
spot,
Different place.
totally different place, that should never
But
be touched.
we've had work in Miami, we did, you know, completely outside of this realm. We did a building in downtown Miami, and you may have seen it on the news years ago. We had to shut down the entire site because they discovered it was an archaeological site, and how do you deal with that? And, you know, is there some type of mitigation program that you would have that removed, or does it have to be respected and stayed in that location? So those are the things, and those are the challenges. But quite honestly, those are the good challenges they have, because that's why people are coming to that site, because that's what they want to experience. So you certainly wouldn't want to damage or destroy that.
No.
Exactly.
But
And I think to
how would
answer,
we be kept informed if this should start to go into an actual planning state? Would we be kept informed as Northport citizens
of course.
and all as to what is each
Yeah,
step?
and there is nothing here, I want everybody to understand something, there is nothing here that we can speak to that is happening right now.
Right.
We're just talking potential. So when we talk about developing Warm Mineral Springs, you brought up a question of traffic and what have you. My belief is, you make it a park, you're gonna have more traffic than you will with a resort, because people go to a resort and they stay there. They're not going out on the streets, they're not impacting the area around it, they're staying within the confines, in many cases, of that facility. And as George mentioned, he's looking at a 150 foot room boutique facility. So very, very low impact. And you know, versus putting in kiosks and a what do they call it? A musical. I can't remember this. Amphitheater. Thank you. That creates actually more traffic. So, but all of those concerns on the archaeological side are all taken care of in advance. If there's an issue, it doesn't happen. So, and no developer is going to do that blindly. So, yes, Nancy.
Also on Warm Mineral Springs, to Jim, you had mentioned how many years ago these plans actually started. To me, that's strategic planning, but with the changes in the commissions, it fell apart. So what can be done to make it a strategic plan that can be seen through? Because this wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time. So how can you protect the project in the future?
You know what, because of the way government is set up, you really can't. You've got, as the commissioners in the room will tell you, you know, they're in there 4 years, maybe 8 years, and then they change back and forth, 3 years in 1 year, two in another. And as their ideas change, that's what changes everything. I've said, while I was in office, I was a firm believer that a 4-year term or an 8-year term was sufficient, you should go. I've changed my opinion on that, mainly because of this. Because you can see what happens if you have somebody that, let them take a project through. Let them finish the project the way it was designed, the way it was planned. Even though what you heard here today was a little different than it was even in 11 or
So is
12.
there-
In fact, 12, we showed some of his drawings, but they were a little different. At that time, people were talking about a Marriott 600, no, you know, we didn't talk about that, but yet some people were talking about that. That was never a focus, but that scared a lot of people when they said a 600-room hotel by Marriott. God, what would we do with the traffic? How would we handle and so forth? So
Thank you.
it's tough. It's a good question, but it's tough to handle with its government.
Linda?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, and I know the city is going through a master planning concept, which many of these things actually are things that the commission has already set up to go down the path of for incorporation in that concept plan. So a lot of these things are already there with the cabins, with the, ecotourism aspect, so that's all been put out there in several workshops. One, did you attend any of those workshops? And number two, is your company intending to put in a bid for this project to be the developer once our concept plan is put together?
When we initially did our studies 8-10 years ago, we had a lot of, we're not developers, we're just planning, architecture, a design team that would be instrumental in getting it to that point. But at that time, we had several developers that were interested in doing a low-level, low-impact, boutique-style hotel. We work with a lot of developers that had a sincere interest, but at the time, the dynamics were different with the state and the city and in the politics behind that equation, that it just never went anywhere. Now, I would hope and encourage that the philosophy and the direction is sincere in that regard, and we could potentially bring a developer to the table that would work through an RFP and RFQ process with the city to make that a reality, whatever that is. But we would certainly not bring in a developer that we felt would not respect that site. As Peter mentioned, Jimmy Buffett, as an example, is one of our clients. And his resorts and his properties create a huge volume of traffic. That's not this site. We would not bring in a name like Buffett, Margaritaville, or Marriott, or some of the other brands that we work with. This is really a key individual sensitive site that needs to be respected. But to answer your question, yes, we have some folks that would be interested and would probably go through the process if they knew that there was some meat on the bones, and go through that RFQ, RFP with the city.
In fact,
Did you attend these workshops that have been going on? Because this has been.
I have not, but we did at one time, 10 years ago, and everyone kind of lost sight, and we were left out of that loop.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
we were out of that loop, and
Right.
I just got a call from Peter, say, hey, remember me, and that's.
Were they invited?
Everybody was involved.
they were not invited.
No.
It's an open invitation that if the city is having a workshop, that people like George are reading the newspapers and running out to workshops. It doesn't happen that way, Linda, with all due respect. Next question. Yes?
So to piggyback on Jim, if the next group of commissioners agree to something like what you're suggesting, once it's in place and commission moves on again in another 2 years, that project still continues? Or does it cease because there's a new set of commissioners in?
Depends how far you get on the project. If you get to an RFP where you're already got some people, then it would stay. Because the person would go and then they would
And
go.
that takes how long? I mean, an RFP?
Yeah.
How long does that process take before?
Well, if you talk to any of the builders, you're looking at probably a 1.5 year process to go through before a spade goes in the ground.
Nick?
Back to the gentleman from Bayfront, a two-part question. I love the facility you showed us there. First off, what are the obstacles and why is that not in Northport currently? And secondly, when can we get it here?
see, you know, as Port Charlotte continues to develop, they serve this area, you know, which was, you know, tactical when we put in the new MOB down in Cocoa Plum. We put that medical office building, brought all those specialists in to make sure that we're starting to be that partner with Northport as we go forward. And then I think, you know, strategically, you know, if you're looking at a facility like that in Northport, there's a couple things on the horizon that you would really have to look at. And the first being is, what does the landscape look like as a business person? What does the landscape look like in 2 years, 2.5 years, when the Venice Hospital potentially moves from Venice Island to Jacaranda? You know, what does the landscape of healthcare look like in that avenue, especially as Northport is such a large landmass, and the ease of transportation, in my mind, the ease of transportation, having lived on the East Coast, is wonderful over here compared to there. So I think that's going to have to be a step. I think we're going to continue to invest in Northport, you know, as we look at different things. But from a full facility standpoint, just from an investment standpoint, every investor is going to be wanting to look at what does that hospital in Venice do to the, because you guys have ease of access. Pop on the interstate, pop off.
It's 20 to 25 minutes from our house to any facility, including the emergency room, because of the lack of, you know, I can't go down Price. We live out here by the interstate. You can't go down Price because that's a 25-minute drive. You have to go out to Tropic here, you know, across the interstate, out to Tropic here, down to Toledo Blade, and back. I'm sorry. Oh, that's after the ambulance gets there.
What she's saying is very
Let's stay
true.
focused, let's
No,
stay focused on
This is, what is the feasibility of getting something near the interstate or down at, by the ER? No, not by the ER.
If I could finish on my question.
Oh, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry.
And I'll cover what you're saying. Having been a paramedic, I can tell you that you're taking an ambulance out of the area for a good hour, possibly an hour and a half, every time they go on a call. Now, we're trying to subsidize that by putting paramedics in our fire trucks and having BLS units as well as ALS units. That's one of the things I know the chief is working on. But that being said, we still need a facility here. And I know it's about the dollars. I understand that. Is a certificate of need, is that getting in your way at this time?
CON will always get in the way. A certificate of need, which is our CON laws, which basically says you have to go up to the legislature to get approval for another hospital. Those will. I mean, and you know, so there will always be legislated. You guys seen the fight for the CON. You've seen it in Fort Myers. You've seen it in this area. I believe a hospital system dropped their CON recently, their fight for their CON. You've seen it with Venice and Sarasota as they start to look at CONs for their 2 hospitals, which were both approved, ironically. So, yes, those do get in the way.
Well, right now we have 2 ponies in the race. We have Sarasota Memorial and we have you. Which one should I be betting on?
I'll tell you what you can bet on is I'm going to continue to invest in Northport.
When can I get an appointment with you?
Good answer.
Rich?
The West End.
Speaking of the medical, I'd like to either prove a myth or get rid of the myth. Northport being the demographics that Northport is, average age of about 40, 41. There's a rumor going around that the reason hospitals don't want to come to Northport, especially SMH, is due to the fact that we have a sizable population that is in the area of giving birth to babies. And that with SMH being a state-funded or a tax-funded hospital, they have to accept them. And obstetrics is the most expensive type of medicine you can perform practically. And they don't want to come here because they want them to go to you guys or to Venice or to Fawcett. And if they were here, everybody would go to that. Is that any truth to that knowledge at all?
You know, from our standpoint, I don't know, I think that's probably not as valid. You know, we're gonna do over 1,200 births this year. I welcome to do 1,600, 1,800, you know, from our standpoint. So, you know, we want to continue to develop that. Actually, we put this year we ended up putting a OB/GYN clinic in Arcadia this year because you do have to have numbers, right? You do have to have numbers to make an OB program sustainable. So I will say that. If you're going to put an OB program, you've got to have numbers to make it sustainable. So, you know, at 1,000 births and a NICU, we're pretty sustainable. But we did put an OB office out in Arcadia because the Soto Memorial, I think they were running 250 births, 300. That's not sustainable. You know, so they ultimately, as a board, had to make the correct decision and actually close that down, their OB section. But, you know, they used us as a partner to go out there and put an OB office, so that we're caring for those patients in that market and they can get health care right there. Actually, we put it right beside the hospital. But, you know, there are sustainable numbers. I mean, you know, OB has a significant high utilization. You've got, not only do you have nurses around the clock that need to be there to care, but you have OR people that need to be around the clock there to care. You've got to have your physicians on call, ready to come in for that, you know, emergency C-section or emergency care. So, you know, there's a lot of resources that go into keeping an OB program, and that may be just a component that they, you know, of it, but ultimately that's not the
Follow up, if I could, does it have any effect, the fact that we have so many of our population relatively low income and could be on the Medicaid program? How does that affect bringing the hospital to this area?
There is a component of that ultimately when you start to look at it. I think when I came to town 2.5 years ago, that was a component. People would look at that and go, actually, people would make comments to me that there was a high Medicaid uninsured population in Northport. I think that that's changing, and I think it's going to continue to change over time as we bring businesses to town and we start creating things in this market and just the excitement of what's going on. When I start to look at the numbers, if I would go back 5-6 years and start to trend into today, you're seeing that change, which is a positive thing for Northport as they go forward. And I know that the initial conversations when I came to town that was, you know, that was the perception around healthcare. I'm just, you know, being honest. I have no other way to be, but you know, that was the perception when it came to healthcare. And as I looked at it, I said, I want, you know, as I start to see trends, I want to invest in Northport. I see a change. I see a trend to change. And you know, when you look at our building that we built there at Cocoa, that's state of the art. I mean, it is a beautiful facility. And you don't invest, you know, that 20,000 square feet of facility, state of the art, bring state of the art physicians to the market, unless you start to think, you know what, I want to be a part of Northport's change in the future. So, you know, we want to be a part of Northport long term, and we've been here a long time, and we want to continue to invest and develop in Northport.
And that's, if I can just add a little bit to that, I think the role we have in the city is to talk about the future, the potential we have here to attract people like Tim to start looking and saying, hey, wait a minute, I may not have been looking at Northport, now I am. To get people like George saying, hey, wow, they're right, they got all this preserved land, what can you do with that? And then what, you know, the process, just so you guys understand it, with the exception of War Mineral Springs, which the city owns, they would have to put an RFP out for that. And a developer that just doesn't come in, that would be driven by the property owner, which is the city. But typically what would happen is somebody like George might come in and say, hey, he puts a team together, identifies a piece of land, and then comes to the city and says, you know, we want to build on this land and here's what we want to do, and there's a whole process you go through. The trick is how do we get people interested in our city and its possibilities? And that's where the purpose of this believability conference was to open your eyes. So when you talk to people, you're saying to them, wow, what about this and what about this and what about this? You know, the old book of the 6 degrees of separation, you ever hear about that? Where you sit people away from knowing everybody in the world. Okay? You don't know when you say something, when that person says something and that person says something. We need to be spreading the word out there about our potential. And we've got to be looking at what's happening, and you heard it today from the people who are doing it. Okay? They're very, very, very busy people. And they took the time out of their schedule to come down and talk to us today about those possibilities so that you can look and maybe talk to people on the outside. And what will happen is somebody will pick up the phone and call somebody in the city and look for land, and all of a sudden the process begins. But we need to define who we are and where we're going. So, yes, Eileen.
With the West Villages coming in and Grand Paradiso, doesn't that make a more of a need as not so much as a financial burden on anybody?
More of a need for,
Hospital.
Yeah, even a micro hospital.
yeah.
A micro.
And- Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said before, the micro hospital is an interesting new trend. What you've seen as this developed, if you just wanted to look at some macro stuff, go to the East Coast and then follow I-95 down the East Coast. And what you saw was some larger hospitals starting to put in smaller hospitals. They were putting in, you know, these 60 to 80 beds hospitals when you go down towards Vieira over in Melbourne, and then you go down to Traditions, which is outside of Port St. Lucie, and then you went down towards West Palm Beach, and Bethesda put a hospital out there. They were in this 60 bed to 80 bed range. What they did see was, I was in the Cocoa Market. Those facilities were losing money to a pretty large extent, more than they thought they would, I think, in the upfront years. They've seen those losing money. Now I think they're starting to gain traction as more populations start to grow into those markets. If you go to the Vieira market, they continue to build and develop. So I think that their internal hospitals are starting to pick up traffic, and so they may have been a little bit ahead of the curve on it. But that's why some of the micro hospitals are coming in. So you come in at 5 beds that you can expand to 12 beds, that you can expand to 18 beds. Does that start to make sense in the future? And I think we'll probably start getting statistical numbers on these hospitals probably in 2 to 3 years. We should be able to see what's happening in these hospitals and whether they're sustainable. And what components of that are sustainable. Because if you start to build an OR, if you're going to attach 2 ORs to a hospital, that means you need to staff that OR 24/7. But that also means you need to have physicians on call for that ER 24/7. And that includes the surgeons that are going to use those ORs. So you run into some state requirements that, as a hospital, you've got to be prepared to answer. And as you start to answer those questions and make sure that happens, are there enough nurses? Are there enough physicians? Can you sustain that when you may go to, okay, I can keep 18 beds full, but is that sustainable to pay for all the infrastructure? I think those are questions that are coming in the future. And we should have an answer, like I said, 2 to 3 years, we should really have a good answer whether that's sustainable.
Right, thank you.
Jim wants to.
Yes, I just want to add to that. The hospital that's represented here and Sarasota Memorial, they've talked about, and they are offering more and more services into Northport, but not a hospital. And I think, talk to your commissioners here later. Last year you had 2 hospitals outside of those that were talking to the city about coming in. So I think you're having more and more interest. And and we've talked before about that, and I've talked to that in Sarasota also, that I think if they don't move sooner or later, they're gonna lose out. And I believe you will have a hospital here in Northport.
Well, yeah, because of the
Sooner or later,
Braves.
but-
You gotta have something down by Braves Stadium.
Yeah, you can see the activity now that's coming out, and they know that.
Right, thank you.
Yes.
What I see is the linchpin, the thing that we, in order to make all of this stuff happen, I see the linchpin as the 5G. I really do, because that's what's gonna make business, hospital, developers, even the Springs, is going to require that. How do we go about getting that to get here? Who do we go to?
That's a great question, and if I can answer that one. You start, as most of you know me, you start with a plan. If this kind of stuff is what you see in Northport's future, you start with where you're going, okay? Then you work backwards and you say, what do I have to do to get there?
Well, that's what I'm doing.
And well, I'm saying, that's the vision, and that's what we don't have yet. We don't have a detailed, specific plan about what that direction is. But if the direction is for a hospital, as an example, let's just use that, because I think everybody in government would even agree they want to see a hospital here. You'd better have 5G.
Yeah, 'cause you're not
Period.
gonna
You'd better have high-speed internet to every home, because that man can't do his job if he's moving into telemedicine and you're out in the States and you get sporadic internet. My internet was knocked out 4 times yesterday.
Yes.
Okay, and I got cable. How do we allow that to happen? So if you're not, but if you don't want a hospital, then you don't need that high. If you don't want that direction, then maybe you don't need the high-speed internet. But you can't have your cake and eat it too. Or you can have your cake and eat it too. You start with a plan where you're going, then you work backwards and put together the elements that help you get there. It's the same as taking a trip. You're going to New York. Am I going to take a car, a bus, a plane, a train? You pack accordingly. You make your route, etc. So that's what I don't see us doing. So.
Yeah,
Can I add on to that, Peter?
Yeah.
One of the main things you need to do is get the right people up there in the city commission, the ones who have the vision, and will bring the plan. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you. And, if you've got to, here's how it works. It's really simple. You ever hear of Branson, Missouri?
yeah.
Who's heard of Branson, Missouri? Okay.
Love
Let
it.
me ask this question. Go back 30 years if you can.
There was nothing.
Some of you can't. But for those of us that are old enough, go back 30 years and ask yourself, did you ever hear of Branson, Missouri?
It was a vision.
Nothing. Somebody had an idea. Somebody had a vision. And they told enough people about that vision. And somebody somewhere said, I can do that. And they did. And today, everybody knows Branson. So, that's how it gets done, guys. It's not rocket science.
The message is, if you're not going forward, you're dying.
Yeah. And you've got to know where you're going. Tom?
Not on the same subject. Jim, you happen to mention your ideas about 4-year and 8-year term commissions. Would you elaborate on that?
Well, I said it more sarcastically than anything, but what I had talked about was that when I first came into office a while back, I was one of those that said term limits are a must. I think you go in, you do your job, and then get out. Let somebody else take over. But after my 8 years' experience on the commission, I realized that there's certain things that take place that you would love to follow through with. And you can't because of term limits. And so I questioned whether or not term limits should be or should not be. And that was all. That was my inner workings of just how I thought about it. And Warm Meadow Springs was driving that a little bit as well as a hospital. That's, and I think most commissioners might have some of the same thoughts once they get off the dais. Maybe, right?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yeah.
For Don, are you going to have some kind of a public thing where people can come and
Well, you know, we have, that's a good point.
Sure.
You don't have to buy donuts and coffee.
We have a concept we call,
Yeah, I've got a lot, can I get 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms?
actually, I would say it's interesting, we have a list of about 100 people, 150 people have contacted us over the last 5 or 6 months that have property that would like to have us do something. I should mention to you, we're not contractors. Our business model is to create the equipment and then work with architects and building contractors to do that. We talked about building a wall that we would have that people could donate money to and put your name on that wall called the Wall of Change, so that people would have the ability to recreate that. And I'm going to tag in what Tim and George have also said is that, and Peter's been saying too, is about the future of that process. Yes, when we bring the robot down, assuming that it comes in the first quarter of next year, we'll do a lot of publicity about that. And where we build the first structure, I'm not sure. I assume when it gets some hype out of that as well as we can. And as much as we talk about it, jokingly, the fact about the future is that tomorrow is the future. Today is today, yesterday was the past, tomorrow is the future. You need to think about how things are moving. One of the challenges we're running into is the speed of technology and the adaptation cycle of technology. And the companies we're working with on the robotics side really have their act together. The company we're working with on the feed side has been challenged by that process, because all the companies around the world that are building the structures with the robots are having the same problem. How do we feed it that fast? Just like we do with 3D printers. So that's the area we've been working on. We think that part of it is just one part. The other part of the process is to put in a additive manufacturing process with robotics to build the components, a material side and educational side, because we think this as an ecosystem, and just like what Peter's talking, we call it an ecosystem to create this business model, because that ties in very directly to what Tim's doing. When it comes to, we need a hospital, we also need people, and we need skilled people. And that's an issue that Florida's having right now. So we'd like to be able to help that situation. So I'll answer your question, but yes, we're starting to do something that would have a viewing area within the confines of what's available to do that.
Take 2 more questions, if we could. I want to make sure we end on time here.
Yeah, one of the greatest challenges to cities, not just our city, but cities all over, as in regards to the internet, is the state preemptions and the federal preemptions when it comes to the regulations. So we're stifled from being able to bring solutions into the city. So I know our city has done a lot to advocate all the way up to the federal level. And because of where technology is going with almost every single industry, do you see yourselves as far as helping to really eliminate some of these obstacles that are stifling us from the state level as well as all the way to the federal level? Do you see yourselves getting involved in that in order for us to help work together with the private sector to bring some of these solutions?
When I was down at in Punta Gorda with the Florida of counties, and all those commissioners were there, their role is to develop policy, and then they're located in Tallahassee, Florida, so their policy is to lobby for those issues. And that came up during these conversations. You know, the best way to get involved in making change is to get involved in making change. And Peter made a comment to me the other day about only 4,000 people in the city of Northport subscribe to the newspaper. So how the hell do you get everybody out there to understand what's going on? This kind of forum is one of those ways to do that. And to your point, Lindsay, you're absolutely correct. I mean, that was one of the issues they had at this conference, is getting people involved, because it is so critical to all the things we're talking about. So, you know, do some research, get involved, call your congressman. You know, you hear those things all the time. But you need Northport is a city, so it has a lot more capability within the confines of what it can do. So you have to ask yourself, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And how fast you want to get there? And I'm going to tell you, and what Tim is seeing, and I just saw some new stuff that they're working with in the medical field when it comes to 3D printing. That's just amazing stuff. And I mean, it's going to make their job easier. It's going to make what they do different. It's going to, the delivery of medicine is going to be very different. And those things will be part and parcel to how fast you as a community will adapt and absorb that technology. And that comes into how fast the people that run the council can absorb and adapt to that technology.
And if I can add to that, you know, if you want to go out and fight for high-speed internet, because the people who live in the estates don't get it and that's not fair, you're going to have a hard time. But if you go out and you fight for the internet, because our economic future is dependent upon it, we can't deliver the healthcare of the future, we can't deliver the products and the jobs of the future without it, you've got a much stronger argument, okay? Rather than saying, well, I don't get it, so you know, so that's how you play that game. I mean, that's how you promote that, and you go viral on it, and you get people going, and you start getting people talking about Northport taking positive steps into the future. That's one way to push it. So, Rich, did you have a question?
Well, more of a comment about War Mineral Springs. I remember when I first moved to Northport a few years ago, and I think I saw a special on War Mineral Springs that kind of intrigued me. And there was something in the paper a few years before I moved here where we're talking about preserving an archaeological site. And I guess before they deemed it a historic archaeological site, people were diving down in there and grabbing the bones, and I actually saw where people were making their walls and their homes with some of the bones that came out of this place. So, you know, it's already probably been destroyed to a point archaeologically. And I will just say this, if a company is willing to come in here and spend the money that they're going to need to produce what we want or what we decide, it would probably be bad business practice to let that go bad, that whole site go bad. So they're probably gonna do more to preserve that site than a city that could possibly lose money just letting people go in and swim in it. So, you know, let's think down the line when a city is growing and we're really concentrating on putting residents in here more than businesses. Those residences cost money. Those residents moving in here cost money. Okay, so at some point they're going to have to cut budget from somewhere. Do you want it to be cut from War Mineral Springs, or do you want a company coming in here saying, hey, that's our livelihood? We need to make sure it's good. So I mean, as much as I want it to be preserved, and I really do, having another person paying for that instead of the city residences, I just think that's
you know, and to that point, you saw George show you real live living examples where you can keep it preserved and you can turn it into a revenue producer, okay? So it's happening. You can deny it, you can close your eyes to it, you can say it doesn't happen here, but it's happening all over the world. So the question comes down, do you want to pay for it to be a park, or do you want it to generate enough revenue where it actually generates some profit? There are two ways to do this, folks. And what I hope to do today was to bring some believability to it, so it wasn't just me talking. It was people who were doing this and taking the time out of their day to share it with you. So I want to thank you all for coming today. We are on schedule here. Woo! But I want to especially thank our speakers who took time away from their families. They took time away from their families to share their wisdom and expertise, and they did it with no compensation. They're not paid consultants yet, right? Yeah, right. Like me, they believe it's important to inform the public about possibilities and look into the future with purpose, optimism, and hope. And to you, and so I say thank you again to you guys. I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. This means so much to me. And I'll get emotional. But once again, thanks. And to you who came to learn, I thank you. I hope you learned a little bit more about the possibilities for War Mineral Springs, jobs of the future, healthcare, and ecotourism. If you did, please tell your family and friends to go to my website, peterbartolotta@northport.com. And we will be posting this video of the conference. Probably have to break it into smaller pieces, but it'll be on the website. So I hope nobody here minds if we film. Should have asked at the beginning. On the website, register to stay informed. Come to my coffee talks every Wednesday at Overall Restaurant. Talk about anything you want. Come to Barcat Marketplace. Yay! On every Saturday, I'm there from 8 in the morning till 12 noon. Talk to me about anything you want. And of course, vote for me. Peter Bartolotta on 11/6. Thank you all very much.
What time is it on Wednesday?
5:30 to 6:30, Overall Restaurant. Thank you. Okay, thanks a lot, folks.